Hi friends, welcome to our course, Introduction to Comparative Politics. Today we will be discussing about the historical story of the emergence of different regime types, like democracies, fascist regimes, and communist regimes. So as you all know, like democracies or the regime type are the foundational concepts of not only political science as an academic discipline, but also political life. Like uh, how our lives is impacted or influenced by politics in general. So it is very crucial to understand and explain like why some countries are governed or ruled by democratic regimes whereas others are governed by authoritarian ones. So in this brief video, we will be discussing the essential questions through a very important text, which is written by Barrington Moore, The Social Origins of Democracy and Dictatorship. So according to Barrington Moore, there are three different paths to modernity. So he was saying that like them both all democracies, like fascist regimes, like communist regimes, and authoritarian regimes, are different phases of modernity. They are different examples of modernity. And he sees these three routes as different paths to modernity. So some countries took the democratic path, others took fascistic path, and others took the communist path. So according to him, like the democratic path, like the bourgeois revolutionary, started with bourgeois revolutions and accompanied with the emergence of parliamentary democracies, as in Great Britain, or in France, or in United States. So like Puritan Revolution, French Revolution, and the American Civil War are the three examples of these bourgeois revolutions, or these leading to the emergence of democracy in these three countries. Like in fascist regimes, as in Germany during the Nazi regime, and in Japan again in interwar period in 1930s and 40s. Again, we see a revolution, like bourgeois revolution, but this time it is a reactionary revolution carried out by landed elites and accompanied with fascistic dictatorships. And the third path consists of the absence of bourgeois revolution, so that consists sustaining importance of like peasants as a social class, leading to the communistic rule as a result of peasant revolution, like bottom-up revolution. Okay, so let's discuss each of these paths in turn. First one, bourgeois revolution, ending up with democracy. For Barrington Moore, the most important thing while discussing the historical roots of different regime types is to look at the configuration of different social and economic classes and their power vis-a-vis one another. So for the democratic path is in most important or most exemplary in Great Britain. So there is an important balance of power between royal crown and the nobility. So we see neither a very powerful royal crown or nor an independent noble class. So they are in rough balance of power with one another. In these circumstances, there emerge a let's say very growing, like very vibrant, very independent, very rich town dweller class, which is called bourgeoisie. So bourgeoisie emerged as the most important social class, like in England. And in responding to that, like the landed aristocracy or landed elites or nobility, they just choose to commercialize their, let's say, agricultural economy to compete with this bourgeois class. However, while commercializing these their agriculture-based economies, and like enclosure movement was an important historical development there. we see that like the peasants, they lost their access to the commonly used lands, which they used to survive, like simply, to cultivate and to graze, to do agriculture, to earn their livelihood. Upon this commercialization, they didn't have any other choice but to migrate to the urban centers and to work in these factories, okay? In the factories of the bourgeois class, which is emerging as a vibrant and independent economic and social class. So this actually further consolidated the power of bourgeois class against landed elites. So landed elites, like already weakened, like in a few centuries, they had to coalesce or engage into alliance with the bourgeois class in order to limit the encroachments or limit the power of royal crown. So there were already some, let's say, assemblies in Great Britain where royal class or royal crown and the landed elites had their seats. And in a coalition between bourgeoisie and landed elites, bourgeoisie had to, or bourgeoisie achieved to force their inclusion into these formal political institutions. Okay, so they retained the right to vote and right to be elected in mostly late 18th, but mostly early 19th century. So this was the historical origins of the emergence of democracies or first formal democratic institutions in these countries. Again, the first presence of bourgeois revolution or a vibrant and independent town dweller class. Second, commercialization of agriculture by the land elites. Third, like disappearance of a peasant class as a result of this commercialization. They turned into working class, which further increased the capabilities of the bourgeoisie. And the other one is the alliance between the bourgeoisie and the landed elites to like limit the power or to share the power with the royal class, which lead to the emergence of first formal representative institutions. Again, we still don't like he's talking about like early 19th century experience, and we cannot still talk about like universal vote. Like let aside women's suffrage, like the working class didn't have the right to vote, and Barrington Moore didn't care about it. He cared about the establishment of first representative institutions. Okay, so don't confuse the democracy that he's talking about with the one that we are currently living under. The second one, the second path, the fascistic route. Actually, in this, like in the examples, like Nazi Germany or like fascist Italy or again fascist Japan, all of them are in interwar periods in most 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Actually, in the history of these cases, actually we see again a bourgeois revolution. However, this time it has been managed or achieved by landed elites through commercialization of again their agricultural economy. However, in the absence of any growing, any emerging bourgeois class, actually there was still a bourgeois class, like emerging in this country. However, it was quite weak. So, like landed elites could still retain their social power, and even after commercializing their agriculture, they could first eliminate the peasant problem, or they could turn them into kind of a wage laborers. However, they could also sustain their primacy or rule over these people, these peasants, like or these former peasants. And to say these weak bourgeoisie or town dweller class and very powerful, like nobility, actually they engage into alliance to intensify or to institutionalize kind of an industrialized and agricultural economy where labor is suppressed. And this suppression actually became much more intensified as a result of increasing external competition, especially coming from the United States. So they further intensified their, let's say, suppression over this economic labor, over this working class, let's say. So still there were some kind of an like hybrid regimes in this country. So there were like assemblies, there were sort of elections. However, like since these hybrid regimes, like sort of weak regimes, like combining some democratic and authoritarian features, couldn't solve the structural problems which was originated in the increasing competition in the, let's say, textile or agricultural business or economy. So these authoritarian regimes collapsed and they were replaced by fascist dictatorships in Germany, again Italy, and Japan. The most important thing, first, there is no like kind of an emergence of a vibrant independent bourgeois class. They emerge, but they are quite weak compared to like Great Britain. Second, like royal class, nobility or land elites retained their power. Then they commercialized agriculture. Then, in alliance with the bourgeoisie, they intensified their repression over the working class. And after the collapse of these hybrid authoritarian regimes, like fascist dictatorships, replaced those. So, like for Barrington Moore, like landed elites are the most important threats to democratic rule or to the possibility of democracy. Like in United States, like plantation owners, they were adamant opposition to the democratic rule or democratic authority or democratic procedures, right? This was the same in Germany, like Junkers. Again, they were a serious threat to the survival and stability of democracy in that country. And in, let's say, in South Africa, like Afrikaners. So landed elites are generally assumed to be hostile classes to democracy. And their primacy in these countries, in Germany and Italy and Japan, led to the paved the way for the emergence of fascistic dictators. The other part, which started with, again, there is no like bourgeois revolution, and so the peasant question or the social basis of peasantry wasn't eliminated. So there was no bourgeois revolution. So there was no need for the landed elites to compete with the bourgeois class. Then these landed elites didn't commercialize the agricultural economy, which meant the reproduction or like continuity of the peasantry as a social class. And peasantry became or were kind of a very huge bulk of people, who were open to, let's say, revolutionary agitation. So when they were mobilized by, let's say, Lenin and his comrades in Russia and by Mao Zedong and his friends in China, we see kind of a bottom up, like kind of peasant revolutions. So the key thing here is peasantry was still alive in these countries. Their social basis was still there. So there were still important or considerable percentage of population. And when they were mobilized, in the absence of, let's say, commercialized agriculture and in the absence of bourgeois revolutionaries or like these bourgeoisies, so this made it possible for the emergence of communist dictatorships or regimes. Okay, so when you read, let's say, 19th century Russian literature, most vividly in the text of Tolstoy, Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, you still see that the peasant question is still the most important concern in Russian politics at that time. which you won't see in other, let's say, literatures, let's say in English literature or in German literature or French literature, because they have already eliminated the peasantry, okay, which was not the case in Russia, again, which paved the way for communistic regimes. So this is the, let's say, sort of the brief argumentation of Barrington Moore. Again, he is looking at the, let's say, configuration of different economic or social classes and their relative power vis-a-vis one another. When the bourgeoisie is powerful, democracy is very likely, as occurred in Great Britain, France, and United States. And he simply says, no bourgeois, no democracy. Like, this is the most important sentence of him, that everyone should know. No bourgeoisie, no democracy. If the landed elites or aristocracy, they were the dominant class, then it led to kind of a fascistic regimes. If neither of them were an important class, and if the peasantry survived, so which this made it possible for communistic dictatorships to emerge. So this is the, again, summary of brief recapitulation of his arguments. So thanks so much for listening. See you in another video. Take care.